You've been lied to about positivity, and the lie is so deep, so pervasive, that it's literally destroying your ability to think clearly, to connect authentically, and to understand the world as it really is. Theodore Adorno, one of the most brilliant critical theorists of the 20th century, saw this coming decades ago. He understood that what we call positive thinking isn't just harmless self-help advice. It's a form of psychological manipulation that keeps you compliant, passive, and disconnected from reality. Right now, you're probably thinking, but positive thinking has helped me. It's made me feel better. And that's exactly the problem. Feeling better and actually being better are two completely different things. What if I told you that your relentless focus on staying positive is actually making you weaker, more vulnerable, and less capable of creating real change in your life? What if the very thing you think is helping you is actually the thing that's keeping you trapped? He spent his life studying what he called the culture industry, the way modern society manufactures consent, shapes consciousness, and turns human beings into consumers of their own oppression. And he would have looked at today's positive thinking movement with absolute horror. Because Adorno realized that when you're told to always look on the bright side, to always find the silver lining, to always maintain a positive attitude, you're being trained to accept unacceptable conditions. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how this works, why it's so dangerous, and what he would tell you to do instead. By the end of this, you'll understand why your commitment to positive thinking might be the very thing standing between you and the life you actually want. This isn't about becoming negative or pessimistic. This is about developing what he called critical consciousness, the ability to see through the illusions that keep you small. But here's what makes this different from every other critique of positive thinking you've heard. We're not just talking about being more realistic or balanced. We're talking about understanding how positive thinking functions as a tool of social control, how it keeps you from asking the right questions, and how it prevents you from seeing the real sources of your problems. His insight was that modern society has created what he called pseudo-individualization. You think you're making your own choices, developing your own thoughts, creating your own happiness, but actually, you're following a script written by forces you don't even recognize. The positive thinking industry sells you the illusion of control while actually making you more controllable. The first insight that will shock you is how the culture industry manipulates your consciousness without you even knowing it. Adorno discovered that what we consume as entertainment, self-help, and personal development isn't neutral. It's carefully designed to shape how you think about problems and solutions. The culture industry doesn't just sell you products, it sells you ways of thinking that benefit those in power. Think about it. When something goes wrong in your life, positive thinking tells you to look inward. What can I learn from this? How can I grow? What's the opportunity here? And while personal growth isn't inherently bad, this constant turning inward prevents you from asking more important questions. Like, is this system working for anyone? Are these conditions acceptable? Should I really have to find the silver lining in exploitation, inequality, or genuine injustice? The positive thinking industry has created what he called standardized consciousness. You think you're developing your unique perspective, but you're actually thinking the exact same thoughts as millions of other people who've consumed the same content. You're being programmed to see problems as personal challenges rather than systemic issues, to see solutions as individual responsibility rather than collective action. He believed that true freedom requires the ability to say no, to refuse, to critique. But positive thinking culture has made critique itself seem negative, toxic, even dangerous. You're told that questioning the system makes you a victim, that pointing out problems makes you part of the problem, that anything other than grateful acceptance makes you ungrateful. The second way this controls you is through what Adorno called negative dialectics. and this will completely change how you see personal development. Traditional thinking says you should eliminate contradictions, resolve tensions, find balance. But he saw that life is inherently contradictory, and attempts to smooth over these contradictions actually prevent you from understanding reality. Positive thinking forces you into what he called false synthesis. Instead of sitting with the genuine complexity of difficult situations, you rush to find the lesson, the blessing, the silver lining. But what if some situations don't have silver linings? What if some experiences are genuinely harmful and shouldn't be reframed as opportunities? Real wisdom comes from what he called determinate negation, the ability to say clearly what you're against, what you refuse to accept, what you will not tolerate. When you're always looking for the positive, you lose your capacity for appropriate resistance. You become someone who can be exploited because you'll find a way to see even exploitation as a growth opportunity. Let's say you're in a job that's draining your soul, paying you barely enough to survive, while your boss makes 10 times what you make for doing less work. Positive thinking tells you to focus on what you can control, to be grateful for having a job at all, to look for the learning opportunities. But Adorno would ask, why are you trying to find the positive in a genuinely exploitative situation? Why aren't you angry about obvious injustice? Here's the third thing he discovered about false consciousness, and this is where it gets really disturbing. The positive thinking movement has convinced you that your natural, human responses to difficult situations are somehow wrong, toxic, or counterproductive. It's taught you to police your own thoughts, to suppress your own feelings, to distrust your own perceptions of reality. When you feel angry about something genuinely wrong, you're told that anger is toxic. When you feel sad about loss, you're told to focus on gratitude. When you feel frustrated with unfair treatment, you're told to take responsibility for your response. This isn't wisdom. This is what Adorno would call ideological manipulation on a massive scale. He understood that authentic human beings have complex emotional lives. They feel joy and sorrow, hope and despair, love and anger, often simultaneously. This emotional complexity isn't a bug in the human system. It's a feature. It's what allows you to respond appropriately to different situations, to connect authentically with others, to navigate the genuine complexity of existence. But positive thinking culture wants to flatten you into a perpetually upbeat, endlessly grateful, constantly optimistic version of yourself. And this flattened version isn't really you. It's a consumer-friendly, socially acceptable, easily manageable version of you. You become what he called a one-dimensional person, someone who can only think within narrow, approved parameters. The culture industry doesn't want you to develop critical consciousness because critical thinkers ask uncomfortable questions. They point out contradictions. They refuse to pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. They organize with others to demand better conditions instead of just working on their attitude about bad conditions. Write in the comments, I choose truth over comfort, if you're ready to stop sugarcoating reality and start seeing it clearly. The fourth insight about determinate negation will revolutionize how you see personal power. Adorno realized that your capacity to say no, to refuse, to reject, is actually more important than your capacity to say yes, because anyone can be trained to accept, to adapt, to find the positive. But it takes real strength to recognize when something is unacceptable and refuse to participate. Think about how conversations go when you're locked into positive thinking mode. Someone shares a genuine struggle, and instead of sitting with them in that difficulty, instead of validating their experience, you immediately jump to solutions, silver linings, lessons learned. You can't just be present with pain because you've been trained to see pain as a problem to be solved rather than an experience to be honored. This makes you emotionally unavailable to others and to yourself. Real human connection requires vulnerability, authenticity, the ability to share your struggles as well as your successes. But when you're committed to maintaining a positive attitude at all times, you become someone who's pleasant to be around, but impossible to truly know. He believed that genuine relationships require what he called determinate negation, the ability to say what you're against as clearly as you can say what you're for. If you can't express disappointment, frustration, or hurt, you can't have an authentic relationship. You can only have a performance of a relationship. Subscribe if you're ready to stop being a victim of your own positivity and start thinking critically about the world around you. But here's where this gets really practical. When you develop the ability to say no, to refuse, to resist, you don't become negative or bitter. You become discerning. You develop what Adorno called critical faculty, the ability to distinguish between situations that deserve acceptance and situations that demand resistance. Some conditions shouldn't be accepted. Some situations shouldn't be reframed. Some experiences shouldn't be seen as opportunities for growth. Sometimes the appropriate response is resistance, refusal, rebellion. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is say no, fight back, demand change. His insight was that the capacity for negation, for saying no, is essential to human freedom. When you lose that capacity, when you're trained to find the positive in everything, you become what he called totally administered, completely controlled by forces you don't even recognize as controlling you. Here's the fifth and most powerful insight from critical theory that will change everything. Adorno understood that most of your problems aren't personal problems requiring personal solutions. They're systemic problems that require you to see beyond individual symptoms to underlying structures. When you're trained to see every problem as an opportunity for personal growth, you stop seeing problems as problems that need to be solved collectively. You become passive in the face of genuine injustice, exploitation, or harm because you're too busy trying to find the lesson or reframe the experience positively. This is perhaps the most insidious aspect of positive thinking culture. It takes your natural human instinct to resist unfair treatment and redirects it inward. Instead of working to change bad conditions, you work to change your attitude about bad conditions. Instead of demanding better, you practice gratitude for what you have. But he saw that real change happens when people stop accepting unacceptable conditions and start organizing to create better ones. When you're trained to see systemic problems as personal challenges, you never develop the critical consciousness necessary to identify and challenge the systems that create those problems in the first place. For example, if you're struggling financially, positive thinking tells you to focus on abundance mindset, gratitude practices, and personal development. But critical theory asks different questions. Why do full-time workers need multiple jobs to survive? Why has productivity increased dramatically while wages stagnated? Why do some people have more money than they could spend in multiple lifetimes, while others can't afford basic necessities? These aren't personal problems requiring attitude adjustments. These are structural problems requiring collective solutions. But when you're locked into positive thinking mode, you can't even see the structures, let alone organize to change them. Adorno believed that authentic hope emerges not from ignoring difficult realities, but from understanding them clearly enough to identify real possibilities for change. He called this determinate hope, hope that's grounded in reality rather than fantasy, hope that emerges from understanding the actual conditions you're working with. The truly free person isn't the one who's always positive. It's the one who can respond appropriately to whatever situation they're facing. Sometimes that means gratitude, celebration, joy. Sometimes that means anger, resistance, refusal. Sometimes that means grief, mourning, acceptance. The key is developing the emotional range and intellectual honesty to respond authentically rather than automatically. So the next time someone tells you to look on the bright side, to count your blessings, to maintain a positive attitude, ask yourself, what am I being asked not to see? What am I being asked not to feel? What am I being asked not to question? Because often, the things you're not supposed to notice are exactly the things most worth paying attention to. His insight was that the need to let suffering speak is a condition of all truth. Your suffering, your dissatisfaction, your anger, these aren't obstacles to wisdom. They're often the very things that contain the most important truths about your life and your world. When you stop medicating reality with positivity, when you stop avoiding difficult truths with gratitude practices, when you stop suppressing legitimate complaints with affirmations, you discover something profound. You discover that you're stronger than you thought, more resilient than you imagined, more capable of handling truth than you've been led to believe. And you discover that real change, authentic growth, genuine transformation, these things don't come from thinking positive thoughts about negative situations. They come from seeing situations clearly, feeling your responses authentically, and acting with integrity based on what you actually observe, rather than on what you wish were true. Type in the comments, I trust my real feelings, if you're ready to stop performing positivity and start living authentically. This is not about becoming bitter, cynical, or hopeless. This is about becoming real, authentic, genuinely powerful. This is about developing the courage to see clearly, feel deeply, and respond honestly to whatever life presents you with. Because ultimately, he understood something that the positive thinking industry doesn't want you to know. That the people who change the world, who create meaningful lives, who build authentic relationships, who solve real problems, these aren't the people who always look on the bright side. These are the people who are willing to look at reality squarely, to feel their responses honestly, and to act with integrity regardless of whether that action feels positive or negative in the moment. Your capacity to think critically, to feel authentically, to respond appropriately, these aren't bugs in your system that need to be fixed with positive thinking. These are features of your humanity that need to be honored, developed, and trusted. Because when you trust your real perceptions, your authentic feelings, your honest responses, you become someone who can engage with reality rather than hiding from it. And that's when real change becomes possible.